first, I wanted to just start with Brian. You're usually the one on the other side of the story's reporting. So what's it like when it's flipped around and now you're part of the story?
It's awkward for a few days or for a few weeks, and then it becomes remarkably comfortable. Maybe because Andrew just came with himself and a camera and a microphone and didn't come with a sound man or with any lighting or a crew or anything. And maybe because he came so many times, so many days, that he really blended in very quickly. And probably also because he was quiet and because he would ask questions, the kind of questions that I would ask if I were doing it. Because he acted like a journalist and because he was performing a journalistic act, which is this film, it became pretty almost dangerously comfortable.
And Andrew and Kate, from your forays in the culinary adventures of New York to the New York Times, how did this story come into your lives?
Sure. Well, I actually met David Carr, who sort of was the focal point from which the whole movie sprang while making the movie about Le Cirque. He has a cameo in the film. And I was interviewing him actually about another project, ostensibly about Web 2.0 for HBO. And I was talking to him about Foursquare and social media in general and the power of social media. And it was around the period that the Times was becoming sort of the poster child for the crisis in newspapers. And Michael Hirschhorn had just published his End Times article. And so this conversation with David, which was taking place at the New York Times, became an opportunity for him to really talk about, well, where is the New York Times in this future with social media being an avenue for information delivery? What will happen to sources of original reporting? And so suddenly I had this sort of light bulb moment, and I thought, what about telling a story about digitization and everything that's happening, over the shoulder of you as you write on the revolution in the media landscape, but also the stakes are so high because, for David, he's sort of writing potentially the obituary of his own industry. And so that's where it started, and from there we went through many conversations, and Kate came on board, and we worked on the film.
And I think we also wanted to create a document of a time that was clearly a turning point. Ariana Huffington says it in the film, and actually it's a pretty fair representation, I think, of her position, but, the idea of the effect of the internet on publishing being similar to the effect of the printing press, and to create a document of that happening in our generation.
And what was the hardest thing about getting access to the Times? And once you were in there, were there any moments where you were told to shut off the camera or stay out of the room?
Well, Brian can speak to this, I'm sure, too, but among the sort of meetings and discussions I had to have with various people at the Times included a meeting with all the journalists of the media desk for them. So basically it's important to note that this movie is not a New York Times product. They had no editorial control over the film. And so no one was also sort of forced to participate. Everyone could elect to do so or not. And Brian was among the journalists who assembled in a conference room when I came to meet with them. Bruce Headlam sort of brought me in. He's the editor in the film, and actually that morning I had pink eye from my son, and I sort of my eyes were red and I was kind of tearing up, and I said, I thought if I came in crying you would have sympathy.
The emotion won them over, the
exactly.
False emotion.
Right. No, but I mean, many of the journalists had concerns about compromising their sources, about things being found in the footage on from their computer screens or conversations they were having on the phone. And I explained to them that it's really a relationship of trust that develops hopefully in the creation of a film of this sort. And I'm not going to shoot things and then put it on YouTube and sort of expose you. It's
And as you see, the names are bleeped out at one point, because those names were not printed in the paper and thus were not published in the movie.
Right.
I elected to do it because I felt that the benefits of transparency outweighed the dangers of revealing sources, and the annoyance, frankly, was the bigger point. The annoyance of being followed around with a camera and with a microphone on your back. The Times, I think, historically has been this fortress that's hard to penetrate hard to get a phone call even into the Times, never mind get it returned from a reporter at the Times. And obviously that's changing thanks to the web, and I think this film is another example of that changing. The fact that the Times allowed Andrew in and gave him free access to roam around, and that we were willing to do it, I think speaks to that transparency, that we're more open than we used to be.
The question is, how has the iPad and other media affected the Times?
Yeah, for the most part, what we're producing on the iPad and on mobile apps is a different flavor of our same website. We have some apps that are created just for the iPad and for phones, and they're pretty cool, with restaurant reviews and with recommendations. They're just created for the apps. But for the most part, it's a different flavor of our website. And so far, it seems what's really important is that combination of tablets and apps, and then our digital subscriptions. The fact that we're now charging for the website for the first time, we're charging for the entire site ever that we've had a site. That's been a big sea change for the Times this year. And in fact, I'm glad that it's in the film to the extent that it is. You see the announcement day of the paywall. It's now online. It's been the better part of a year now. Reviews have been pretty good. The feedback we've gotten internally has been pretty good. It's not perfect yet. I wish it was a little easier to pay than it is right now, but we'll get there. And I think the fact that we've taken that leap and said the Times website is worth something, and reading on the iPad is worth even more. We charge more if you want it on an app. That's important that it set a bar. It set a threshold saying news is worth this.
And Andrew and Kate, you edit, correct? So you're shooting and you're editing your material. Was there any point before it was having its world premiere that you did show it to the Times, or did they have to wait like everybody else to see it?
Well, just to, I edit a little, and I did sort of take an additional editing credit, but we had 3 editors who really were sort of guiding the ship, and that was Chad Beck, Chris Brink, and Sarah Dvorkin, and Kate and I have a writing credit, which often sort of confounds people. Why would there be a writer in a documentary? But we tried to give a sense of structure to it, and we're part of that process. What was the other question?
Showing it to the Times.
Oh, right. So we did, before Sundance, there was a lot of talk at the Times as to whether David and Brian should attend Sundance, and sort of what would the official position of the Times be on the film. And so as a courtesy, we did show it to Bill Keller and other members of the masthead, and gave them an opportunity to see what this thing was. And ultimately Brian and David and Bruce and actually Bill Keller himself have participated in panel discussions and stuff about the film. So it seems that they thought well enough of it to participate on that level.